Hi, it's Jamie from Gilbrook Farm. Let's talk about how to stock a prepper pantry. So there are many reasons why I have a prepper pantry. Things like job loss, blizzards, ice storms, hurricanes, and even earthquakes are all things that I have personally experienced in my life, where having a stocked pantry has been vitally important to not only my survival, but in getting through very tough times. More recently, in our state of North Carolina, there have been riots in Charlotte and martial law that was enacted. So going out into a grocery store was not a viable option at that time. Currently, it is post-election, and there are a lot of protests going on now, a lot of violence with those protests. So there are three types of prepper pantries. One would be a working pantry where you're continually using the product that you have stocked. Another would be a long-term pantry where you're stocking maybe 5, 10, sometimes 20 years worth of food for, say, a long-term emergency. Then the third type of prepper pantry is one where preppers are storing food for, say, a complete and total collapse of the economy, and they would use their stored goods as a form of currency. Now, the type of prepper pantry that I have and that I use is a working pantry. Everything that you see here is all products that I use on a continual basis. The only exception to that is my water, and my water is used for emergency only. So I stock a 6-month to 1-year pantry. So which is it? Is it 6 months or is it 1 year? Well, when I buy an item, I buy a 1-year supply of that item. But because this is a working pantry, I'm continually using that item, so it immediately starts depleting. Somewhere between the 6-month and probably 9-month mark, I'm starting to look for sales for that particular item, and I will go out and I'll buy another additional supplies to bump it back up to 1 year. At any given time, I have a 6-month supply of everything on hand, but I could have as much as 1 year, and in some cases, on items that I don't use as much, a little bit over a year. So the first thing that I did in building a prepper pantry was to write down every single item that I used over the course of a year. That's a lot of work. I got an Excel spreadsheet and I categorized all of my items and I wrote down everything that I used. And then I started eliminating items that I don't use very often. It's very important that when you are starting a pantry that you consider the amount of space that you'll need, and the more items that you have, the more space you're going to need, and the more things that you need to keep track of when you're replenishing those supplies. Another thing that I considered when creating this document is items that I can use for different things throughout the house. So to give you an example, I use rice for our meals, but I also use rice to create a gluten-free flour. So there's something that has a dual purpose that I can use for several different things. Another example would be vinegar. Vinegar is something that I use for canning, but I also use that as a cleaning product. So again, trying to find items that you can use for multi-purposes is something that's really going to help you in building your prepper pantry. After I got that list narrowed down to the bare amount of products that I needed, I started writing down all of the prices that I could currently get those items for, and then I price compared with other stores and bulk suppliers. I found the cheapest price, or notated the cheapest price for all those items, and that's the store where I purchased that particular item. I found that a one-stop shop just doesn't happen. You're going to find prices that are a lot higher and a lot cheaper at one store, so you need to be able to get the cheaper prices at the cheaper stores. That means shopping at multiple places. For me, I shop at my local grocery store when they have big sales. I shop at Walmart when they have some cheap prices on things like rice and beans. I shop at Trader Joe's because they have some good prices on chicken, and where I get a lot of my bulk grains and product is a company called Azure. If you're interested in Azure, I'll leave you a link to that, and you can see if that's right for you. Meat is an item that I store mostly by canning. Some meat I store in the freezer just because it's really hard to make a meatloaf out of canned ground beef. But for the majority of my meat, I store it in cans. Now, this will last a minimum of 1 year. I've read about people who have opened up cans of meat, jarred meat that was 5 years old and it tasted perfect. Mine doesn't last that long, but it does last quite a while. Now here I have a bunch of canned tomatoes and store-bought canned tomatoes. My goal is to eventually replace all of the items that I purchase at a store with things that I can grow on the farm. However, we had a really terrible year with tomatoes this year because we had a plague of squirrels that came in and basically ate all the tomatoes from our garden. But my goal there is to replace all of my items with items that we can grow here on the farm. Canned tomatoes here will last several years. Potatoes. I buy my potatoes in bulk. I did try growing them this year. I just don't have the space to grow as many as I use. So I buy a 50-pound box of potatoes and I keep them here in the basement. Now, to store potatoes, you need a cool environment and you need to look at your potatoes often. You need to pull out any ones that are rotten and snap off any eyes that grow. Once the potatoes start to get a little bit wrinkly, then I can them. And these are fantastic for making like quick mashed potatoes. Beans are an item that I used to purchase through stores, but now I can my own. I find that it's a little bit cheaper and a little bit healthier as far as sodium. Now, what I do is I buy a 25-pound bag of each type of bean that I use, and then what I do is I can just a small batch of those. It would be ridiculous for me to can 25 pounds of every type of bean. That would be a lot of jars and a lot of canning. So what I do is I can a small batch, and then as I start to use those beans, I'll just do another batch. What do I do with the rest of the beans? Well, I store them in Mylar bags. Now the Mylar bags, this is a 5 mil Mylar bag that I got from US Emergency Supply, and inside of here is an oxygen absorber. Now what this does is it helps to remove the oxygen from the bag so that bugs can't hatch. These beans will probably last me longer than a year. If you're storing for less than a year, probably not important to use Mylar bags, but for me this is a really good option because this is going to be one batch that I do for canning. These are the Mylar bags that I buy. This particular one has a Ziploc on it. You don't need to buy that. But what you do is you fill up the bag with your beans. You're going to add one of these oxygen absorbers to each bag, and then very quickly you're going to seal it with a hot iron. And that's how they store. Rice is an item that I store in a 5-gallon food grade bucket with a Gama Lid. Now a Gama Lid is an item that you can again purchase from US Emergency Supply. There's a bunch of other sources that sell it. Actually Azure also sells these as well. It's a lid that just pops onto a 5-gallon bucket, and it is airtight, leak-proof bucket. Really convenient for items that you're using on a continual basis. Now because I will go through this entire bucket within the course of a year, I don't need to use the Mylar bags. I just put it in the 5-gallon buckets with the Gama Lid, and I throw some bay leaves in there to help prevent bugs. Spices are an item that I buy in bulk, and because they're already in plastic bags, I just store them in a plastic container. Now I tried doing storing them in canning jars and putting an oxygen absorber in there, but they didn't quite seal, so this is really not a great option. I found this is just fine. Now these spices here will last a couple years or more. Pasta is an item again that's pre-packaged. Very simple to just throw it into a plastic bin. This is a 1-year supply of pasta for us. It was just on sale recently, so I just stocked up, and this is my full 1-year supply. Now dried fruit is an item that I sometimes buy in bulk. Raisins I do buy in bulk, and I just store it here in a 5-gallon food grade bucket. Actually, I think this is a 3-gallon food grade bucket. And then some dried fruits are already pre-packaged, so I just mix them all together and throw them in a bucket. These will last for at least a year. So let's talk about some things that don't store very well. Brown rice is one item that doesn't store very well because it has a higher nutrient value than a lot of the white rices. It will only last about 6 months. White rice can last 10 years, but brown rice will last only about 6 months. Another item that doesn't store very well is whole nuts. Because they have a high oil and fat content, they will probably only last about 6 months. Regular cooking oils such as olive oil, again, this won't last very long, some of them 6 months to a year. The exception to that is coconut oil, which can last up to 2 years. Nut butter, which actually is a nut, actually stores a little bit better than just whole nuts, It will last about a year past the expiration date. Another item that doesn't store very well is processed grains, so flours. They have a very short shelf life, maybe up to 6 months, so this is another reason why I make my own gluten-free flour. So you'll probably notice that a lot of the items that I have are bare bone ingredients, items such as rice and beans and just jarred tomatoes and meat. That's because I cook the majority of my meals from scratch. Now, if you don't cook from scratch, that's okay. You can just store your prepper pantry with things that you currently use, whether it be canned soups or whatever it is. Just make sure that when you're stocking your prepper pantry that you only stock items that you use. You don't want to stock items that are going to go out of date and expire because you're just wasting your money. Another thing to take into consideration is the nutrient value of the items that you're storing. You probably don't want to store 20 bags of Doritos. But an item that would be good to store if you eat it is tuna fish. So make sure you keep that in mind. Items that are nutrient dense are going to be really important, especially if it's a crisis situation. So another thing to consider is where and how you're going to store the food that you're purchasing for your pantry. Several times here I mentioned food grade buckets. Now these round buckets can be purchased from an emergency supply place for about $7 or $8 each. However, you can get them for free at a lot of bakeries. What I like to do is I like to take my 10-year-old along with me as cute bait and then go up to the bakery managers and ask them if they have any food grade icing buckets that they can give me. A lot of times they give it to me for free. Now my daughter doesn't mind going along because basically she uses that as an excuse to raid all of the free samples in the grocery stores. But that's one option that you can try. Now if you can't get those, another option is these rectangular buckets that you can get for $1 at the Walmart bakery. They will charge you $1 per bucket. It's a bucket and a lid. And honestly, that's kind of worth it because it's a really cheap bucket. You would normally be paying $7 or $8. Now the only problem with these buckets is they do not work with the Gama Lids. The Gama Lids are round. These have a rectangular lid. Another thing to consider is shelving. Where are you going to store your food? Now these two shelves here were our original shelves for this house. They are designed specifically for canning jars. You can see that there is just barely any clearance here to conserve space. We recently have built these other shelves over here which are designed for these 5-gallon buckets and for these plastic bins underneath. Let's talk about pests. Anytime that you have a pantry or food storage, you're going to have pests such as bugs and mice. For mice, these cheap mouse traps that you can get for $1 at the dollar store are a fantastic method. Just throw some peanut butter on there and make sure you monitor your traps, throw them away whenever they're full. The other thing is you notice that I have everything in double containers. So I have most things in a food grade bucket or in a regular plastic bin such as this one, and usually the food is inside of another packaged item inside. That's a deterrent against both bugs and mice that might chew through those items. Make sure you monitor those buckets to see if you see any chew marks. If so, make sure you put out your mouse traps. As for bugs, there are a couple different things you can do. One thing that I do is bay leaves. In my open containers, I will put bay leaves in, which is a deterrent against bugs. The Mylar bags also, by removing that oxygen, helps prevent bugs from hatching. Now there are two methods that I don't use that other people use. One is diatomaceous earth. I use that in my chicken feed, but I do not use it in my personal food. The reason why is because I did a test on that and I found that it made me have an upset stomach. So if you guys are going to want to try that option, make sure you test it on yourself before you put it in your food. Another option is putting your food in the freezer for about 3 days, which supposedly kills all the bugs. Now I buy such large amounts of food that it would be impractical for me to put all of that food in the freezer for 3 days, even if I broke it into small batches. It's possible that I could put it outside in the winter time to kill the bugs. It's not something that I've tried. I really don't have that issue right now. So until I do, that's not something I'm going to try, but it's something that you guys might want to look into. So let's talk about some special circumstances. If you guys live in a flood zone, you're going to want to take precautions against your food getting damaged by flood. Make sure that you have it up off the floor so that it will not get wasted. Another thing that a lot of people have asked me about is whether our shelves were earthquake proof. They are not. We do not really get earthquakes here in North Carolina, but There are a lot of weird things going on these days, like with Oklahoma and earthquakes, that it probably wouldn't be a bad idea for us to go ahead and make these earthquake proof, so, or at least earthquake resistant. We'll probably do the upgrades to these shelves in a future video. We also need to add some supports as well, so you'll probably see that coming out. So there you go, guys. This is our 6-month to 1-year food pantry and how we store all the items and how long we store them for. Now, if you guys don't want to store a pantry that is that large, it's okay. You can apply the same principles to, say, a 2-week to 4-week pantry. I am by no means an expert on food storage. However, there are a lot of people on the YouTube community that are. So if you have any tips or tricks, feel free to leave those below. And if you have any questions or comments, leave those below as well. If I don't have the answer, I'm sure somebody else will. If you guys like this kind of stuff, feel free to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Some items are significantly cheaper. Really, I'm watching your eyes follow that now.
I thought he was going to land on me.
Beans. I used to buy canned beans, but now I can